Start live. This is the Capital Improvement Program Committee, Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. I want to announce that the Capital Improvement Program Committee for the Town of Mashpee will conduct a public hearing on the proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2026. The said hearing will take place on Wednesday, January 29th, 2025 at 5 p.m. in the Wacoit Meeting Room at Mashpee Town Hall, 16 Great Neck Road North, Mashpee, Massachusetts. I want to just provide the public with an overview of the Capital Improvement Program summary and the proposed recommendations up to this point, January 29, 2025. I'm going to announce the item that was requested by the department and the potential funding source. I'm going to go over the list that there was a consensus on, department by department, and then get to the items that were deferred for further action. First was conservation, a truck replacement at $55,000. The proposed CIP recommendation is $50,000. The funding source is free cash. DPW, replacing a 2015 International truck. The request was $120,938. The funding source was free cash, and that is recommended by CIP, at least initially. The next item at DPW is replacing a 2015 International at $122,631. That funding source is free cash. That item is tentatively recommended by CIP. DPW replacing a 2016 International. The department request was $115,000. The CIP tentative recommendation is the same, and the funding source is free cash. The next item is the replacement of a 2016 Ford F-250 at $75,000. The item after that is replacing a 2017 Ford F-550 at $140,000. The next item is replacing a 2017 John Deere mower at $70,000, and the next item was replacing a rotary boom mower at $100,000. All of the items that I just listed, which includes a total of 4, were not in the CIP recommendation. So the department request was $743,569. The CIP recommendation is $358,569. The next department is the transfer station, replacing the recycling compactors at $26,000. The CIP recommendation was $26,000. The funding source is free cash. Fire department, replacing 2 ambulances at $1,100,000. The CIP recommendation is the same. The funding source is ambulance receipts. Replacing CPR devices is the next item at $72,000. CIP recommendation tentatively is $72,000 from ambulance receipts. Replacing, I believe it was a hose, at $90,000. The CIP recommendation is also $90,000, and the ambulance receipts is the funding source. The total is $1,262,000. Information technology desktop replacement, $60,000 was the request. The CIP recommendation is also $60,000. The funding source is MCAT funds. Managed firewall services at $46,000 was the request. The CIP recommendation is also $46,000. The funding source is MCAT funds, for a total of $106,000. Natural Resources, replacing a F-150 pickup truck at $48,480. That is in the tentative CIP recommendation. Funding source, free cash. Replacing an F-350 pickup truck at $96,252. That's in the CIP tentative recommendation. Funding source is free cash. There was also a request to replace an F-250 at $59,756. That is not in the CIP tentative recommendation. There is also an Aquay Bay Marina permitting and design requested $150,000. That is not in the CIP tentative recommendation. The department request was $354,488. The CIP tentative recommendation is $144,732. Planning and construction. The flooring replacement was requested at $100,000. That is consistent with the CIP initial recommendation. Its funding source is free cash. Security camera DVR replacement. The request was $50,000, as was the CIP tentative recommendation, and the funding source is free cash. The fire alarm system upgrades, $26,600. That is also the CIP tentative recommendation. Again, funding source, free cash. Town Hall Archives sewer connection and parking lot improvements, design and engineering. The request was $60,000. The proposed recommendation is $60,000. Funding source, free cash. MHS roof restoration, non-solar sections. The department requests $1,377,400. That is the CIP proposed recommendation. And there is a split with the funding source with $627,477. That's derived from, what is that?
Free cash.
Oh, okay, free cash. And then the $749,923 is from capital stabilization. Next up is the school HVAC upgrades, $3,275,000. That was the request. That's consistent with the CIP proposed recommendation. That's from capital stabilization. The senior center roof restoration, membrane, the request was $184,000. That was not recommended. The senior center emergency generator at $60,000, not in the recommendation. Mashpee Public Library emergency generator, the request was $156,000, not in the initial recommendation. And the Quashnet KCC bus access road design and engineering at $75,000 was the request. That is not in the CIP recommendation. The next item up under planning and construction is the PD station renovation / construction. That number is $37,150,000. CIP recommendation is pending. The funding source would be a debt exclusion. Police, 9 vehicles at $168,000. That was the request. The CIP is recommending that be funded from free cash. Second line item was 3 police vehicles at $218,900. That was funded also at free cash for a grand total for police at $386,900, excluding the police station. Next up is the school Chromebook leases. The request was $50,000. The CIP recommendation is $50,000. The funding source is free cash. Wireless upgrades, the request was $30,000. The recommendation is $30,000. Funding source is free cash. Firewall replacement, all schools, the request was $50,485. That's the CIP initial recommendation at $50,485 from free cash. The food service equipment upgrades, the request was $25,000. The CIP proposed recommendation is $25,000. Funding source, free cash. Grand total for the school, $155,485. Wastewater. Item number 1 is wastewater Phase 3 recharge evaluation. The department request was $200,000. The CIP recommendation is pending. The funding source would be a debt exclusion. Mashpee Wakeby watershed wastewater system design and engineering, $2,500,000. The recommendation is pending. The funding source would be a debt exclusion. Mashpee Wakeby design and engineering, $250,000. Again, that recommendation is pending. The funding source would be a debt exclusion. Total wastewater is $2,950,000, and that's just a portion of it. The next portion I will get into, which is the Mashpee Wakeby watershed wastewater system construction. That request is $24 million. This is pending further discussion. The funding source would be a debt exclusion. Mashpee wastewater Phase 3 design, including sludge removal. That request was $12,480,000. That's pending as well, and that funding source would be a debt exclusion. These totals would be $36,480,000. That is the summary and the overview of the capital improvement program to date. This is what we have been presented by department heads. This is what we have discussed at meetings. And now it's an opportunity for the public to make any comments on any of these items that they so desire. Anybody from the public that would like to speak?
Sure. Are we recorded? Do I need to identify? I'm John Cotton, 30 Knobska Road.
You are being recorded.
I wonder, I totally am with the moving forward with wastewater. As far as the Wakeby, the section in the middle, as far as wastewater, as far as the wastewater design and engineering, because that would just keep the momentum going with, wastewater. But as far as moving forward with the construction, on those last two, 24 million and 12 million, I think at the present time, I would be strongly against that, considering we already have a request for a new police department at 42 million.
It's actually less than that.
Oh, I'm sorry. 37. So, I think that's the town to bite off on all that at one town meeting. I think that's a lot to ask for, and I think you might get a situation where they may choose one or the other wherever their priorities lie, and I think the police department, in my opinion, is a priority. And at the same time, we are still moving forward with the wastewater proposals as far as the design and engineering. So going forward with design and engineering, I'm in favor of, but those last two large requests, I would recommend that we don't proceed with those at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, hearing none, take a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? Any discussion? Roll call. I'm going to be taking roll call votes.
Ms. Lopes?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey?
Yes.
Ms. Thayer? Mr. Collins?
Yes. Public meeting is closed. Now we get into deliberation. So what I'd like to do is go block by block and start with the tentative amount, which includes what we had a consensus but no formal vote on. So specifically, just so you understand, and I appreciate you making it, John. For those in the viewing audience, he was not actually late. He cannot be in two places at the same time. He's on the Health Department board and had a meeting.
Yes, we did.
So what I'd like to do is go block by block, and what I mean by that is start with the numbers that were tentatively recommended that we discussed, from conservation to DPW, the transfer station, fire, the information technology, natural resources, planning and construction, except for the police station, the police department in terms of the vehicles, the school, and then that's it. And then the second block would be getting into the police station, because we haven't really discussed that, and then we would get into wastewater. So,
I'd make a motion, we adopt the formal recommendations for the blocks described by the chair.
Second.
any discussion on that? Seeing none, roll.
Ms. Lopes?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey?
Yes.
Ms. Thayer? Mr. Collins?
Yes. Next up is the police station. So, right now, the total is, again, $37,150,000. This would be a debt exclusion, and this would be voted on in May.
A motion to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
This would be a standalone article, subject to debt exclusion,
Yes.
separate. So the first block we just voted on would appear as Article 3 or 4. This would be Article 4 or 5,
Yes.
presumably.
And I did check into this earlier today. I've checked with finance, I've checked with legal, and obviously, because it's seeking a debt exclusion, we need to obviously go through the twofold process that you're very familiar with. We got to have the two-thirds vote at town meeting, and then we've got to have the majority of the ballot vote. So this would be standalone because of the funding that's
This is in
necessary.
keeping with prior precedent.
Yes.
Good.
So that's the grand total. Obviously, it was funded through design last year, and this year we would be seeking construction. For those who are in the viewing audience, the new facility would be built just behind the existing facility. The existing facility would continue to operate while the new building was being constructed. And at some point, the new building, if it's approved, would be occupied. The existing building would be removed, and parking, et cetera, would accommodate subsequent thereto. I think the important thing is everybody from the select board to the finance committee to any other committee, or for that matter, any interested citizen that wants to have a tour of the facility is certainly invited to go on one, and seeing is probably believing as far as the need. Having said that, anything else?
How many folks work at the police department?
There's 39 full-time officers. That does not include the civilian dispatchers, and it doesn't include the support staff of clerical personnel.
Okay, thank you.
And obviously, you realize it's a 24/7
Absolutely,
operation.
24/7.
They don't shut down at 4:30 in the afternoon,
Nope, they don't.
just like the fire department.
And I think those of us that have toured that facility, it's in horrible condition. And in fact, we were told that the state could shut down the jail for air quality. So we need to do this. We need to do this.
For the viewing audience that may not be aware, there is an air quality issue that's been detected. We are failing inspections through the state in the cell block area. We do have a visiting rat that is in the basement of the police station. We've got photographs of the rat. And also, there's mice, a couple photographs of the mice as well. There's been a sewer backup in the locker room that's caused some very unpleasant conditions. And the place probably isn't real functional given today's needs and personnel. So anyway, without further ado, unless there's anything that somebody wants to discuss further, we'll take a roll call vote.
We talked about the lockers. When I toured the facility, they're up on, not stilts, but they're,
Cinder blocks?
yeah, something like that, because of the issue with the septic, because it
Yes.
keeps flooding and things get ruined. So that's a pretty difficult condition to work in, if you ask me. And it's overcrowded as well, so.
Roll.
Ms. Lopes?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey?
Yes.
Ms. Thayer? Yes. Mr. Collins?
Yes. Okay. So what I would like to now do is get into wastewater. And obviously, there's one block that really consists of wastewater, but it's essentially in two categories. One is the Phase 3 recharge and the watershed design and engineering, and then Mashpee Wakeby, as well as the construction component and the sludge removal. So I know that we had a little discussion at our meeting yesterday in terms of whether to defer to fiscal year '27 or not. I know Mr. Gottlieb has been very articulate in stating his view. I'm just concerned against having the police station up against a major wastewater item at the same time. Having said that, I want to entertain any,
I move to recommend inclusion of the CIP items in the amount of $2,700,000 to be submitted as a debt exclusion for the wastewater Phase 3 recharge evaluation and the Mashpee Wakeby watershed wastewater system design and engineering as listed on CIP plan as presented.
And not the alum treatment?
Oh, I'm sorry, and add the.
So that would be
alum treatment.
2.95.
2.95. Thank you.
I'll second that.
okay, so there's a motion and a second. That would be those three items listed
As a debt exclusion.
as a debt exclusion. It does not include the lower two items. There's a motion, second, discussion.
I think that the voters could handle the 2.95 in a debt exclusion right now, going forward, and keeping the momentum going forward with the wastewater. I don't want to see us get bombarded at the end with a very high tax rate. And we're doing this, and we said we would stop after Phase 2 and look at where we are and what we're doing, and we are. But we're also going forward with the design and engineering of Phase 3. So I think that would satisfy people at the moment so we can see where we are.
Can you tell me a little bit about the alum treatment and why that's important?
So the study by UMass indicated that one of the primary drivers of the toxic cyanobacteria blooms in the pond is driven by two things, both phosphorus loads. One comes from the septic waste going into the groundwater, which is what the project to construct the wastewater system is intended to address, and the phosphorus that's in the sediments. So when organic matter is in the pond, leaves the algae that blooms during the summer and dies back, settles down to the bottom, partially breaks down. It's got a phosphorus load in it, like
Right.
any other compost or leaf litter that you might have in your yard. Because the water quality in the pond is so bad, the bottom layers of the pond lose oxygen in the summer in oxic conditions. When anoxia occurs in fresh water, it creates a chemical reaction that releases the phosphorus from the sediments back up into the lake where it serves as food, and it creates another ongoing recycling doom loop. It feeds the next generation of toxic bacteria that live in the water column in Mashpee, Wakeby, typically June.
Right.
And then that dies, settles back down, rinse and repeat, the cycle continues.
And this is similar to what's happening in Santuit Pond as well?
It's similar to Santuit, it's similar to Ashumet, it's similar and endemic to ponds across the Cape. So the idea here is you do two things at once. Alum treatment, so phosphorus likes to bind to carbon, all right? The sediment falls, it holds carbon, the phosphorus binds to the carbon in the sediment, except when that anoxia occurs. Alum think of it as this way, it's sticky,
Right.
right? So it grabs the phosphorus and it holds it even when you have anoxia. So it basically retains that phosphorus load, keeps it on the bottom where it is not bioavailable to create new cycles of plant growth. So alum is a good interrupter of this cycle. It's limited as a singular solution for a couple of reasons. Like everything else, it only has so much capacity. So you put a certain amount of alum in the water, it holds a certain amount of phosphorus, and then it becomes overwhelmed.
Right.
So if you're not stopping new sources from coming in, ultimately the alum gets overwhelmed and you're right back where you were, but 10 years later down the road. That's why you pair an alum treatment with septic reductions so that you interrupt the cycle and cut the source.
Right.
When you cut the source, water quality gets better, bottom layers become oxygenated, you don't have that anoxia that creates the problem. So you need a holistic solution. The reason you can't rely on alum and alum only forever is it's a heavy metal. And so if you do too much of it, it becomes its own source of toxicity.
Right.
And it kills everything on the bottom, and it potentially has the ability to work its way up the food chain. So you do alum in combination with other stuff. If you only do alum, you're kidding yourself. It's like a sugar high. First couple of years after you do alum, things look better. Then slowly, you're adding more phosphorus in because you haven't dealt with the wastewater, and then you're 5-10 years down the road, you're back down where you were. That's where we are with Ashumet. This will be alum treatment number 3 for Ashumet because it wears off over time.
Okay.
So it's a Band-Aid.
It's a Band-Aid if you do it only. It's an effective, so if you go on a crash diet, you lose 100 pounds, and then you decide you still want to go back to the buffet, you're going to be back pretty much in the same place you were pre-diet over a period of time. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So you gotta cut the food source, and you gotta do something to restrict what's happening. That was not targeted at anybody, don't smirk at me.
And that one treatment would probably last 2 to 3 years?
10 years.
10 years.
If done right, you can get 10 years, and that's roughly been the experience in Ashumet. But if you think about it, from the time you decide to move forward with the wastewater system, you build it, you connect everybody, and you start having the reductions, 10 years goes quick.
Right.
Right? So can I speak to Carol's motion?
Sure.
So what I'd like to suggest is,
It was seconded already.
all right, so,
Okay.
so I like the first part of what you're saying, and I'll vote for it. I'd like to suggest an alternative way of dealing with the 24 million construction project, which is to defer it until October. I agree with the general sentiment of and I would never argue against the importance of the priority of the police station. And I don't think I think there's merit and value to telling people in relatively clean terms, your big ask at Springtown meeting is the police station. And I think the merits of the police station will warrant and result in
Wholeheartedly.
a significant vote forward. If you defer till October, the benefit of doing that is you retain and you make a contingent upon getting state SRF funding. You are giving the town notice of what's coming several months in advance. If you're successful in getting funding, you're preserving that funding option for your voters, and with that funding comes no interest and 28% principal forgiveness. So if the project comes in at 24 million bucks, you're taking advantage of the opportunity to bring $8 million into the town that would not be taxpayer funded, that you might get in 26, fiscal 26, 27, you might not. So if you make a contingent on getting that money, you're minimizing the cost of the project to the town taxpayers, continuing to make progress forward, as Mr. Cotton said, and you're giving yourself the opportunity to educate people over the period of the spring and see if that state funding comes through. If the state funding doesn't come through, then pull it
In October.
in October. That way, and I know it's not, I know that October town meeting has historically been, but is not exclusively limited to, we've done financial things of
Yes, we
significance
have.
in the past. I would just simply respectfully suggest that this achieves the dual objectives, and we're always balancing objectives as
Yes,
a
we are.
municipality with multiple changes, of putting a clear priority in front of your voters on a clean warrant, while continuing to tell people you're making progress and taking advantage of as much state and federal assistance as you possibly can, because the future isn't guaranteed. And we all know the other part of it is that everything costs more year over year.
Oh, we do know
So if
that.
you can lock in, if this is 24 million this year as an estimate, it'll probably be 25, 6 next year.
No question.
So, one step forward, 2 steps back, so it's trying to find a balance. So I would ask that we talk about that as an option that I think, I've heard, you and I have had extensive conversations
have.
about this. I understand and respect John's view of it. It's a way to find a middle ground that creates a clear priority statement from the CIP about what the police station warrants, but keeps the ongoing conversation and discussion going on wastewater.
And that's what we want to do.
Understood.
Is keep it going.
Understood. And-
But also, we want to just have in check that the taxpayers are paying for this. And I don't want to see at 2028, this big bill coming that everybody says, opens up their bill and says, oh my God, my tax?
Absolutely in agreement. I guess what I'm saying, whether you're on the board or not at that point, this strikes that balance, because I'm not sure that deferring till fiscal '27 without the promise of the SRF money actually helps the taxpayer very much. Because eventually you're going to do this work.
Eventually, yes.
Eventually you're going to do
No
this
question.
work. So if you can do it in a phased basis and take advantage of money that you know is on the table, and only if the money's on the table,
Right.
your taxpayers are better off.
And if it's not on the table, we
Then you
can pull
defer it
it
till you
in
apply
October.
again, you pull it, and you apply again, and you see what your chances are the following year.
What does
I would
everybody,
never suggest that you go ahead with these projects without the SRF funding.
what does everybody think about?
Last thing I'll say is, the precedent has been set with the state, with the town of Dennis, extending the deadline for action till their fall town meeting in 2024 for a $248 million one. If the town requests the time extension to get on October's warrant to let this happen with a subsequent debt exclusion, the precedent has been set that you'll get that, yes.
Well, it also gives us an opportunity to get a more thorough number. If they're doing the design and engineering, it gives you an opportunity, that number may be different, maybe lower, I don't know.
Or it could be less.
Could be less, yeah.
Can't be more, because
Right.
you've set that upper limit here.
Right, exactly.
So it has to be less or it can't proceed.
Right.
Right.
Same or less.
It'd be nice to have a nice,
GHD always knows, or always knew, that that number could be less, but not higher.
right.
I
I'm
guess,
trying to balance what I'm legitimately hearing from you and from
Yes,
the manager about the need to balance priorities.
right.
I had a conversation earlier and said that I couldn't support the 24 in May of 25. As far as your modified proposal is concerned, I defer to everybody else, but this is what I would say. I don't want to make a big argument October versus May, because we're only talking 6 months versus a year. But at the same time, it does achieve the objective of not putting it on the May 25 warrant, which I didn't want to be heavy. The only thing that causes me any concern at all is I do know that we've got contracts that are going to have to be ratified, and I'm going to be seeking funding for in May of '26. That will certainly have an impact. But this is what I would say to Mr. Gottlieb: as long as, and I understand you don't control the voice of every person in the community, but as long as the people who listen to you are not going to be jumping up and saying that the town isn't supporting clean water, because that's not true,
That isn't true.
I can certainly live with October versus putting it off another 6 months if it's recognized that we are in the top tier of addressing the clean water needs in Cape Cod. I think maybe we had discussed Barnstable, Chatham, or possibly Orleans being ahead of us. But I think it's fair to say we are in the top tier in addressing the water quality needs. We're spending a lot of money. As a matter of fact, a total of 193,300 and, what did I say, thousand? I'm sorry. Yeah, I wish it was.
Exactly.
I wish it was. $193,353,780. That's what we've invested from soup to nuts.
So far.
So we have, in fact, invested a lot of money in making a difference, and I think we're on the right path. I can certainly support your compromise if we all understand that we've got a common purpose here, and we're trying to achieve good things for the betterment of the town, and we got to look sometimes at this committee at the big picture, because we're not just getting wastewater requests, we're getting DPW requests, PD requests, FD requests that are mission-critical pieces of equipment that have got to be provided, and whether it be the school or whether it be one of the departments that I just cited, we're trying to balance all of these things with capital stabilization, with free cash, and I know that this would be a debt exclusion, so that makes a difference. But
I guess,
I share Carol's concern that at some point, the people are going to say, enough is enough. So I could support it on the condition that it does get SRF approved and it goes in as a debt exclusion.
In
You don't
October.
expect.
in
you don't-
October.
In October.
In October.
October.
You don't expect me to come up with it.
I do not. And I would say, I speak only for myself, but I think that what you would hear from me is, this is a reasonable compromise that recognizes there are competing priorities, and that in light of what you're saying about your pending need for funding collective bargaining and other things that are coming up, this gives the town the best opportunity to maximize the amount of outside, non-tax payer funding into this project, because it lets you move knowing, and only knowing, if you have state assistance and $8 million, whatever the 28% ends up being, which is not guaranteed in '27. So if you were to move this to '27 and sort of set the expectation that we're going to do this project, but it's a coin flip whether you're getting additional state or federal assistance, that doesn't really help the taxpayer. It defers a cost a year, but it raises the amount of money that they have to reach into our own pockets to do. So I think that is the argument to anyone who would choose to listen to me, I would make to them in support of this overall approach as being strategically the best for the community.
What changed from the last time I spoke to you?
I think we're in consistent agreement here, perhaps, that moving to October is a reasonable thing to do.
Well, I'm
the
glad,
reason-
I'm glad you came up with it.
Me too.
There you go. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Yes.
So just to confirm, we are going to approve capital at the October special, even though we're supposed to, per our legal opinion, only do it at the May annual.
I do know that we do have a opinion that I will review that specifies the CIP in May. However, I do know that we have authorized expenditures in October, and whereas this is a debt exclusion, I guess the way I'm looking at it, and I would also defer to legal, the way I look at it is, if it's a debt exclusion, whether it goes in October or whether it goes in May, it's going to be a debt exclusion and it's going to stand on its own. If we were seeking funding from free cash, capital stabilization, or something that we didn't have the money ready for, then I would be concerned, because at that point, you're coming up with an expenditure, but we don't have the funding source, which we just identified in this list, or provided a source for in this list. I will double-check just to make sure that it is legal, but I think as long as it remains a debt exclusion, I know we've done that in the past, I just am not sure whether or not KP Law is going to determine that this may breach the charter and/or the bylaws that are applicable to CIP.
And the only reason I bring it up is because we have denied. Like, the Recreation came forward with something funding through the revolving fund, which is not local funds, not free cash, and we said, no, we can't do it at the May special, you have to wait till the annual. So that would just be clarification that I would want, is to ensure that we're not doing anything, if we have a legal opinion, we're not going against a legal opinion that's, especially because we have denied other departments previously.
Yep.
And then my other thing, and I just have a couple comments, it's regarding the process. First of all, I'm concerned that we haven't done the design and engineering before we got the price. And I get concerned when I know we can't go over the 24 million, but now that that number's out there, what do you think the contract's going to come in at?
Right.
I say $23,999,999. Because I've seen situations like that. So that's my concern when we put this forward so quickly before we have any design in it.
You're always going to be working with a working estimate of the engineers, and I would say, to buttress your concern the other way, we talked yesterday at great length about a rescission of $5.5 million in debt authorization for a prior appropriation amount for earlier phase where the number was known. I mean, the contractors always know our number because you publish it on the warrant. It's what the competitive market would allow at the time and how hungry people are in terms of what works out there. So that's, they also know that you're appropriating $37,250, whatever it is, for the police station.
But we know that that's a number because we have the design and engineering.
But but it's an estimate, and I think that I think that saying that GHD will design to the number.
I'm not accusing them of doing that. I'm just saying I've seen situations where we've had design and engineering, and then the construction contract, the appropriation comes, and it's almost to the penny.
Yeah.
Understood, but that is oftentimes a occupational hazard of public finance and public procurement. I guess I would say I think you should trust the process, and you should trust everybody involved before they sign a contract that you feel like you're getting a reasonable price. Just because you're authorized doesn't mean you need to proceed, and that's always going to be the case. Once that design number is done, this has happened before where we substituted numbers in at town meeting after having published, more times than I can think of. Mm-hmm. We've gone to town meeting the day of with amended language when we had a spaceholder number, and then it adjusted. And it always obviously has to adjust down because you can't go above an advertised number. Fair point to raise, but I don't think it's determinative.
Well, and then the other thing is, are we going to allow departments to come in when they have a major project with their design and engineering and construction all in one? Because it's not fair, in my eyes at least, to say to the school, we're not going to give you your design and engineering and your construction all at once. You got to do the design.
You're not giving it to them all at once in this. You're bifurcating.
I'm saying you've covered both your bases, really.
I'm saying, I'm not pushing doing them both on the same warrant because I think there's some validity to that point, Don.
Yeah.
But what I'm suggesting is we not do that.
Yeah. And then my other thing is as far as the phases, I'm concerned that we're doing these little jogs that are outside the 5 phases, because we've told the taxpayers, this is going to be a 5-phase, and I think we're all prepared. We know it's going to be a lot of money. But now we're kind of going off, and it's not like it's a few $100,000. We're talking $24 million. That's a huge addition to a 5-phase project that's probably going to be at least $500 million, I would say, at the low end. Just from original numbers that we've seen in the past. So are we going to have more of these coming along, I guess? Are we always going to be faced with another $250,000, or quarter,
I guess and again, I don't speak for anybody anymore.
Yeah.
Well, the way I would explain that is if you think about the 5-phase plan, it's a nitrogen control plan that's intended to clean up Papaneset Bay and Wacoit Bay. It touches on the lakes as an incidental piece as part of nitrogen reduction for the bays. It's not designed to reduce phosphorus, which is the driver on the lakes, okay? So we don't have a plan as a community to deal with our fresh water, nor does any one of the other 14 towns. So we don't get a dark mark on that relative to our competition. This particular initiative, because we have a lot more knowledge and science resulting from the SMAS report and all the monitoring that DNR has done over the years, has told us that we have a phosphorus problem that the 5-phase wastewater management plan will probably never solve. And so Mashpee Wakeby is different than Santuit and different than Johns and Ashumet, because the Johns and Ashumet and the Santuit loads are managed as part of the likely phases of, phase 2 is capturing a big chunk of the flow from Santuit, right, the west side there. Phase 3 for Wacoit envisions sewering almost the entirety of the perimeter of Johns and Ashumet Pond, not to help Johns and Ashumet Pond, but to reduce the load in Wacoit Bay.
Right.
The orphan in this whole scenario is Mashpee Wakeby. And so this initiative that's being taken out of order or out of context of the plan, I would argue is largely a one-off that's not replicable, because the other 3 major freshwater bodies in town are accommodated within the phases 1 through 3 that are either underway or probably underway in a reasonable time period. So, that would be my answer as to, when does the next $25 million exception show up? I would argue it probably doesn't.
So can we guarantee the taxpayers?
I can't
and say-
guarantee anybody anything.
Well, or, I'm trying to make sure that they trust our judgment, trust our recommendations, and say, we're trying to, we're leading you down a path
I think what you can rightfully say to them is, we knew we had a problem on this pond that was not accounted for. The town invested $250,000 in authorizing the SMAS study 3 years ago. You got the results, and you're working to implement those results in a reasonably timely manner, and that there are no such other large unknowns on fresh and saltwater quality that are not incorporated in the plan that we currently have. That, I think, is an honest statement.
Let me just read from Article 7 of the bylaw. This is in reference to what Don was referring to. I just happen to have the charter and the bylaw here. The Finance Committee will include said program, including explanations in its report in the spring annual town meeting. Let me get to the capital improvement program. So it's to be submitted to the town manager by the second annual written report containing a capital improvement program for the following fiscal year. The town manager will submit the capital improvement program to the Finance Committee by the first Monday in February. That's happening tomorrow night. The Finance Committee will include said program, including explanations, in its report to the spring annual town meeting. The Finance Committee will submit an article to the Board of Selectmen or Select Board for the inclusion in the warrant of the budget for capital outlays as recommended by the Capital Improvement Program Committee. I don't think
Shall
this,
or may?
It's saying May.
it says will submit, but I guess to get to Don's question, I think in regards to the CIP Program Committee's report and its recommendation, I don't think there's any doubt that it's supposed to go in May or the Springtown meeting. My question for legal is whether or not the committee can essentially take an action that would recommend something to go to October for the purposes of a debt exclusion. I would be completely against it completely if hypothetically there was an expectation that was going to be funded through free cash. But I think she makes valid points. We do have.
I think that would be
Better.
the better way to do it.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. So the motion
agree.
stands then?
So my motion stands.
Well,
Well, I just have one question. It seems that we're only talking about May town meeting. Would this committee reconvene to do an October vote?
My understanding from what Mr. Collins says, the report of the committees due to the Finance Committee by the end of May.
Right, for what's going forward for the the annual
Well,
town
it's
meeting?
not really clear about that.
right, so generally speaking, The CIP report consists of replacement of vehicles and equipment and assets and school requests, DPW requests, et cetera. So this is presented to the Finance Committee. They come up with a recommendation, either recommend or not recommend. It goes to the Select Board, and then it goes on to town meeting. The process generally would consist of exactly what the Finance Director said, which is the funding is in May. As a matter of fact, there's a portion in the charter that specifically says financial matters should be taken up in May. But we know that there are exceptions, and we know that exceptions have been made, and we know that exceptions have been considered legal. The question is whether or not this CIP recommendation could sort of be modified to include October versus May.
I like John's suggestion. We do this
Fine.
first, and then make another motion to put the other in October.
Fine.
But my motion will stand.
And
for
I
the-
want to state that I have no problem with going to October if that's what we can do.
We can
because
do.
In the past, it's been very helpful because we have more accurate numbers for different
Right.
things come October. That little glitch that happened a couple of years ago threw a wrench in a lot of
Right.
situations. So if we can, I think that's, you know,
And I want to be clear that I would not be supporting this if it wasn't a debt exclusion in October, because that's just asking for trouble.
I know.
I think I would definitely be on your page as far as trying to come up with funding sources.
No one suggested not doing a major capital expansion like this on anything other than debt exclusion.
Exactly.
Exactly.
and then.
Or even if it was the other item, not the
No argument.
24, but
No
the 12.
argument. No argument.
Okay.
The other item is, is it possible, and I know there's a lot of forgiveness, can we get an estimate of, because we've had some mixed information, what's coming down and how the Cape and Islands Protection Fund is going to be dispersing funds and that kind of thing. I think that would be important for the
Yeah,
taxpayers to know.
that's easy to provide. There's no lack of clarity about that. It's.
And can we get a commitment from them? Like if.
You get a commitment, when the project appears on the state IUP. So you will get a contingent, what's called a contingent commitment from the Cape and Islands Trust. The contingency is that you do the project. That will say they are committing to 25% subsidy of the principal amount listed on the IUP. So you would have all that.
Because we had a little area where it was, the funding may not be there, like.
That issue was dealt with by the management board by changing the way funding has been allocated, or is going to be allocated going forward from the 2025 list. The amount, because of that change in process, the liquidity of the fund is no longer in question or in doubt. So
So you are 100%
I
confident
am
that.
100% confident
that
the
we would
money is
get-
there, and that you would have an in-writing commitment before you went to town meeting,
That would be really important, I think, to
with
tell people.
with
that-
no equivocation associated with it.
I think that would be huge.
Mr. Collins, as it was presented, putting the design and engineering and the construction together at the same time, I think that's bad policy to do that.
I agree.
However,
We all agree.
the fact that the compromise to that is what Andy is saying, and I think that's a good workaround, particularly if you discover if it's legal or not legal, how that works. We're going to make sure we have the SRS funding, make sure that's in, and then go from there to see where, get the other commitment
then if
from
it-
that money and see, where it goes from there. So it's I think it's a good compromise.
Well, like most matters, I do try to reach a reasonable compromise. I know that we had a little disagreement earlier, but this I can live with in terms of it not being on the same town meeting,
Right.
it not being one item pitted against another item that is heavy, considered a lot. And then lastly, I think I might be accused of being stubborn by Mr. Gottlieb if I said, well, I don't want to go in October when we're only talking about a 6-month difference to May of 2026, or excuse me, 27, no, it would be 26. If hypothetically, everybody was in agreement
Right.
that we were going to be pursuing it in May of 26.
Right. So it would be a heavy lift to put all this together on one warrant, I believe. But by
I-
separating it
I
out,
agree.
I think that meets your criteria and makes us feel all better that it's going to be moved off to October and things are still going forward.
Yes, and
I feel
again,
that-
not to keep sounding like a broken record here, but to the finance director's point, I understand that we would typically do this in May, not in October. October is usually for zoning bylaw changes and things of that nature. But we have been known to do something in October if the funding is there. And in this case, you acknowledge it's a debt exclusion. In fact, I think that would be part of the
Prerequisite.
motion. Prerequisite.
Why don't we clear
All right, so-
Carol's motion, and we can do
We
it.
got the motion, we got the second.
On the
Any further
2.95.
discussion?
And this is, we're doing this because I think people need to understand the timing is an issue.
Yes.
I think that's
Exactly.
a big thing, is
Absolutely.
that's the only reason this would be something that would go on the October town meeting. So the next person that comes along and wants something, well, you did it in October.
No, what I would argue, what I would answer them is, it let us capture X dollars of subsidy that would not necessarily be available if we waited till the
Another
following
6
spring.
months.
And we'll know
I think
whether this is-
that answer, because there aren't going to be too many people, agent departments that come to you with a major capital project and somebody else willing to pay 25% of it. So if the precedent, what you're setting here is, if you can come to the table with a large subsidy that might not be available if we wait till the following May, we'll hear you. Otherwise, you wait. I don't think you're opening the door very broadly.
Well, that's what I want to confirm with this group, because I know that there's been times in the past that the schools have been deferred and told that we had to go to the annual town meeting. And if I'm hearing that if the schools or another department wants to come forward where they have funding that's not free cash, not capital stabilization, and an offset, that this group will hear it to be put on a special town meeting. Because there are times where the schools have funding that we can use, but it's over $25,000 and needs to go to this committee. So I just want to make sure that, is it a one-time thing that we're doing because of all the opportunities? And I hear you, and I agree with the thought process behind it. But I think for myself and for my department, I want to understand, is it one time in nature, or is it going to be, we have to check all of the boxes to be able to come in front of this committee for a special town meeting?
Well, first of all, this isn't a special meeting, it's an October meeting. So we have a Springtown meeting in May, we have a Fall Town meeting in October. Those are regularly scheduled every year.
But
We-
it's not the annual, is what I'm sorry if I'm not clear enough. It's not the annual town meeting.
Yeah. Well, it's not the typical town meeting where generally budgets and financial items are passed, which is May. However, again, if, to Mr. Gottlieb's point, if there's an incentive for the town to do it for various reasons, and the window might be closing to receive some incentives or whatever, then I think we're always going to be open-minded to hear
If
what
it's
the
an
options
opportunity to
are.
save the town money for something you're going to do eventually anyway, I wouldn't be, beholden to the process argument. So if you're going to lose an opportunity to bring some money into the town, I would think you'd want to entertain it, and that's our obligation, because the whole goal here is to do what we need to do, but do it at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayer.
I agree
So-
with you.
So, if anybody else could come in and make that case, you'd be foolish not to listen to them.
And the school could have MSBA money,
Correct.
things like that for a major school project that is the same exact situation.
Correct.
So as long as we're all on the same page that,
Right.
yes, we all agree that as long as we can move forward with it, that in other situations, I think that's important to,
I do, too.
Okay, so,
Question.
that's my line.
again, what you will be
Not that
voting,
different, Don.
what you will be voting
We should
on.
do two separate.
Chew on
We
that.
we are. There's a motion.
Yeah, and we
There's
got
a
a
second. There's been endless discussion
Productive
regarding
discussion.
Yes.
these items. So right now, It's the three items listed under wastewater on page 3, totaling,
2.95.
yes, 2.95, and I think it was originally at 2.7, but it's 2.95.
Because I didn't include the aluminum.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And is the alum is just design and
It's just the
engineering,
design.
and
That
we
would-
need that for moving forward.
That's going to have to, that'll be a year following, you know.
But we
the-
need this in order to go to the
Yeah,
next
to
stage.
know your number.
Yeah.
But you're voting on 2,950,000 debt exclusion.
Exactly.
That's what you're voting on. Roll call.
Ms. Lopes?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes?
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey?
Yes.
Ms. Thayer?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that the committee support or include in the CIP, the Mashpee Wakeby watershed system construction in an amount not to exceed 24 million, subject to a debt exclusion vote at a election scheduled by the board, and the award, the appearance of this project on the 2025 State Department of Environmental Protection intended use plan for SRF financing
In October.
in October.
Second.
And subject to legal review.
Well, obviously, everything is subject to legal.
Second, Mr. Collins.
Okay, so there's a second. Any discussion?
We beat that horse, didn't we?
No, we did.
Well, we compromised. We did good.
Well, I like compromise. I like to work things out if
If
I
we
can.
Yeah?
I didn't think this was gonna work out, but
No? I'm
Pressure
I'm
makes-
very
press-
pleased.
Pressure makes diamonds.
Really?
you never cease to amaze me, Mr. Gottlieb.
So now we need to vote.
Roll call.
Ms. Lopes?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey?
Yes.
Ms. Thayer?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
Thank you, Andrew.
And as a matter of just housekeeping, I think we ought to indicate, as we did yesterday, that the design of Phase 3, everything else on the wastewater agenda slides a year as a result of this action. So the 5-year plan would have Phase 3 design showing up in '27. That would bump construction out to '28.
Exactly.
And then you need to add the alum treatment in '27, because we're designing it in '26. It'd be something you'd want to talk about in '27. So if you want to use this plan to give people notice,
Right.
we need to update that.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
we can do that, and then also, just to remind everybody, I have an obligation to provide the 5-year plan, and what you have in your book is the 5-year plan. I know that there's a lot of numbers that have not been identified yet.
Did the to be determined get added to the school HVAC for next
There's
year?
a lot of to be determined.
Well, it wasn't in there at all, so that's why I just want to confirm, because I haven't seen an updated version of that 5-year plan since yesterday.
We will get that updated and get that distributed.
And then I just want to confirm, when you were talking about the alum treatment needs to be on here, is it currently on this 5-year?
not.
Okay, so that will need to be added as well.
It was talked about in
Right.
Jared's conversation, but it was not laid out in the sequence that this would anticipate.
So you'll get that updated plan to us, Mr. Collins?
Yes, but it's not like, this is recreating,
Yes, exactly. You're not reinventing the wheel.
not reinventing the wheel here.
Is it your request that we all attend this finance committee with you tomorrow?
I don't want
Or a hindrance.
to, I don't want to violate the open meeting law.
It's not posted as a joint meeting.
It's not posted as a joint meeting, so it would be considered a deliberation if we started engaging in
That's true.
in conversations.
We stay home?
I'll offer to stay home.
Staying home
He
anyway.
gave it to me on my calendar, so I've been holding the night.
Yeah, so all I'm planning
Church
on doing
sacrifices
is, all I'm planning on doing is bringing in
What we voted on.
what you voted on, and then obviously, the supplemental will be the 5-year plan, and then I may just tell them these are updates that have been adjusted as a result of tonight's actions.
And I'll affirm our actions as a representative of the Finance Committee.
Yep.
So, just to be clear, this 5-year plan will be, the Allen will be treated, added, and the high school, or the Quashnet School HVAC.
Right, and then a couple other, those other things can move
Right,
over.
for the
We'll all
water.
shift right a
Yeah,
year.
everything will shift.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right,
Just for
that's what
housekeeping.
you already said.
yeah.
I was just clarifying that those would be added, because they're nowhere on here right now, so they're not even
Yep.
on the radar.
Yep.
Okay. Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second? Second?
Yes.
Discussion. Roll call.
Ms. Lopes? Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey? Ms. Thayer?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.